mushers, if you're in this far, you know what the From a Musher's Perspective series is all about. So let's jump right into brakes part 3. First, we'll talk about why precision adjustment is so important for cable brakes versus hydraulic. And then we'll talk about some of the parts that periodically wear out and how to tell when they need replaced, and if you can actually get a nice upgrade in the process while you were already replacing something. So, you've already done these things, or are in the process of following along and learning to do them. The next thing to check is that you have the best caliper alignment, pad spacing, and cable tension possible for good braking power. It's easy to think that your cable brakes just don't work that great. If you have rim brakes, you hear about how much better disc brakes are. If you have mechanical disc brakes, you hear how much better yet hydraulic disc brakes are. But the difference between an okay, basic, safe, adjusted cable braking system and one that's really dialed in is really big. Check down in the description. I put a link to some really thorough Part Tools videos that cover all of those adjustments for brakes. And this isn't just for somebody that plans to DIY. It really will help you understand how the brakes are working so that you know better when you might want to bring it into a shop to have it looked at if you don't adjust it yourself. Next up is, how do you know when the parts that wear out have in fact worn out? First up is cables and housing for rim brakes or mechanical disc brakes. The inner cables and the outer housing need to be changed fairly regularly. Moisture, dirt, snert, all manner of gunk can eventually work its way in to the point that at first you feel a little bit more drag on the levers as you pull. Then it progresses to the scarier stuff. You might test your brakes one afternoon and they feel okay. Then you wake up to a nice cold morning and go for a run, and you find that you either can't get your brakes to go on or you can't get them to come back off again. This is because the gunk has frozen and isn't letting the inner wire slide along inside the housing. Ask me how I know that. So, if you haven't already learned that the hard way, this is why you need to do a good job of replacing cables on a regular basis. But let's say you got the biker scooter or rig used, like I did. Some other telltale signs that you're past due for new cables and housing is missing end caps right here, and that can lead to really bad fraying, and it could eventually come disconnected completely. That's a bad sign. Also, being able to see on this exposed part of the cable if there's corrosion or there's dirt. These are actually coated with an extra film to be slick, so many will just be like a silvery color, and you'll be able to see that there. Also, something to look for is if these cable stops are pulling in and out at the lever here, that's a really bad sign that that cable is not sliding along inside like it should. So get that fixed ASAP. It's really pretty affordable whether you do it yourself or have a shop do it. So it's best to just get done as soon as you start noticing problems. If you have hydraulic brakes, your counterpart for cables and housing is going to be hoses and fluid. So if your levers start to feel less firm or they're pulling back closer to the bar, that'll be your cue that you either need to do a quick lever bleed to get air bubbles out of the system, or if it's been a really long time, you might need to do a complete replacement of the fluids to keep everything working great. The best way to need to replace things less often in the first place is to keep things clean. So off-road rides like this, they're meant to be able to get wet and dirty sometimes, but they're not meant to stay that way and corrode. So if you get mud or dirt or anything on the trail on it while you're on a ride, rinse it off when you get home. A nice hand pump sprayer like this works great once your hose is disconnected and winterized. And also road salt. If you have it on a bike rack to haul it to and from the trail and it gets salt on it, you need to rinse that off too. The next consumable part of the brakes is going to be brake pads, whether they're for disc or for rim brakes. And then for disc, a little less frequently, you'll need new rotors and even new rims on rim brakes. That goes back to what I was saying about keeping things clean. When you get mud on rims and you're using rim brakes, you're basically making a grinding paste against the rim. So that's something to be aware of, that those do actually eventually wear out as well. For both disc brakes like these and rim brakes, the manufacturer should have a guide that tells what kind of material the different pads are available in and how thin they can wear before you need to replace them. Different material choices can be a great way to make at least a minor upgrade to your braking system when you're replacing something that was worn out anyway. You can see on this one it tells about the compounds used and what that is supposed to add to the braking qualities of your brakes. Check on your rotors which pad types they are compatible with. Some of the cheaper ones are not cross-compatible with all pad materials. Another reason to take a close look at your pads is if your disc brake pads suddenly seem to be sliding along the rotors and not gripping as well. Rim brakes slipping along the rim in any kind of wet or damp conditions, that is a common problem, but disc brakes don't do this. They could instead be glazed or cooked from extended use, or if something got on any part of the braking system, they could be contaminated. A big thing to understand about all types of brakes is that you should be very careful not to get anything oily or greasy on them. For example, chain lube dripping on a rear wheel with rim brakes, or accidentally getting your skin oils on rotors or disc pads. It can get into the microscopic textured surfaces of those parts and cause less effective and noisy braking that's very difficult or impossible to remove. Wheel rims and rotors can and do get bent, but in the same way that you or a shop can hopefully true a wheel back to straight again, oftentimes it's a minor bend in the rotor, you can true that straight again as well. But if it's too complex or if it's a really sharp ding, then the rotor just needs to be replaced. If the rotor you've damaged happens to be for a front wheel and you have a larger fork than this, say a 26-inch or larger diameter wheel, you can oftentimes check with the fork manufacturer and they'll let you know if you can use an adapter and an even larger rotor on the front wheel. And as you know from part 2, the front wheel is a great place to have a little more power for braking. Something that can also happen when you have a rotor get bent while in use, especially if you're still going fast and you have to finish the run with the rotor a little wonky, is that the pads can wear unevenly. So if there's enough pad material left and pieces haven't gotten chopped off of it by a really badly mangled rotor, you can often use what I use is a drywall sanding screen and sand it down till you get a nice fresh surface to work with. These pads pictured were not salvageable. They were very old and worn. They were the original ones that came with my scooter, and it's 12 years old. They weren't quite that old at the time, but it took me a long time before I knew about checking the pads and that they should have been replaced long before. It was not pretty when some of the pad material sheared off mid-braking. I can laugh now, but at the time it was a bit scary and embarrassing. So if you've had any sort of braking mishap, take the time to check the pads carefully. Also important to note, when you replace or resurface disc brake pads, rotors, or both, is to bed in the brakes afterward. The surfaces need a chance to sort of scuff each other up and reach full braking power again. Some riders are pretty carefree about this process if they don't ride with a dog, but with a dog attached, it is not a safe way to be waiting that many braking cycles for the full power to come back. That wraps up the most common issues. The only thing that you probably won't be able to solve if you dig into the ideas from parts 1 through 3 is the issue of trying to run just one more dog on a rig that's not really meant for it. But everything else, you should be able to find lots of ways to get a good increase in braking power. Now, That said, the more I learn about my brakes and working on them myself, the more I really enjoy using really good brakes, even if I don't necessarily need all of the extra power. There's a lot of other nuances you can add when you get better brakes. So if there's enough interest, I can make a part 4 and cover some things like the more expensive upgrades or the practical issues with Dryland Mushing specifically as to whether you might be able to upgrade from mechanical disc brakes to hydraulic disc brakes or from 2-piston to 4-piston hydraulic brakes. There's a lot of info here, but knowledge is braking power, so I hope you've found some more throughout the course of these videos. Click on the graphics over here to subscribe or to watch some other videos. In particular, if you skipped over the one about tires, go check that out because that's your connection to the ground to be able to brake.